Reddit. True Crime Mysteries. On July 4, 2009, several faculty members of the finance department of Chinese University met up to work overtime at the Person University to manage and track the school's finances and expenses from the previous semester. 43-year-old Tan Chengwei, a faculty member, was one many had expected to be present, and yet he was nowhere to be found. A man simply referred to as Ma called Chengwei's mobile phone at 11 a.m., but nobody answered. The workload was too heavy for Ma to get too concerned, and he initially wasn't worried, because Chengwei's family had adopted a stray dog. However, their dog had a skin disease, and Chengwei had planned to take the dog to the vet, so Ma wasn't worried, and assumed that's what he did. On July 5th, the university's finance department held its work meeting, but Chengwei failed to show up for a second time. Ma once again called his mobile phone, and once again was met with no answer. Ma, unfortunately, didn't know his landline phone, so he couldn't call that. On July 6th, it had been 2 days of Ma not showing up to work, nor having any contact with his co-workers. Eventually, one of his co-workers reported the situation to the university's finance department. Chengwei's superiors did know his house's landline phone, so they called that number, but just like his cell phone, no one picked up. They then called the library, where his 33-year-old wife, Tem Zhenyi, worked at. According to the library staff, she was absent from work too, and didn't book any days off. The couple were from Zhongshan, in mainland China's Guangdong province, and were married for 11 years. 11 years prior, Anya gave birth to their eldest daughter, 10-year-old Ten Shaowan, and later their youngest daughter, 7-year-old Ten Shaoyin. Although their living conditions and financial situation were not great, and they lived in an abandoned recycling station on Wuzhou South Road, they were described as kind, happy, cheerful, and upbeat people, with their children being well-behaved. Chengwei was known to take his daughters into town to have fun, so many may have thought that the family opted to take a vacation to spend time together. But something came up which stopped them from returning. His colleagues spent the next while repeatedly calling his mobile and house phone in hopes that something different would happen. Eventually, someone finally answered, but rather than being a member of the family, it was a strange, unfamiliar man who sounded middle-aged. The man claimed to be Chengwei's cousin, and that the family had gone to Dongguan, in the mainland's Guangdong province, for summer vacation, and that Chengwei had gifted him his personal phone for safekeeping. He said he didn't know when the family would return to Hong Kong, and after repeated questions, he hung up and turned the mobile phone off. The only thing this call succeeded in doing was making Chengwei's co-workers even more suspicious and worried. Chengwei was always diligent and measured, having never left work without reason, and if he were to go on a vacation with his children, he would have worked things out with their school first. The family also took care of 9 stray dogs, which left the question of who would be caring for them if they went away to the mainland, and how they would afford their vacation to China. Chengwei also used to live with his parents, a father who was a sailor, and his mother who worked at a paper mill, which was closed down by now. However, his father went missing without a trace, and was never found, leading to his mother going ill, which left her in a nursing home. I can't find any more information on his missing father. If you can let me know. It was seen as drastically out of character for Chengwei to abandon her when he visited her weekly. Eventually, they decided to call the police. One of Chengwei's colleagues led the police to Chengwei's home at the abandoned recycling station in Pingche village. On the way there, a curious event had happened. They saw a short man from a distance from the fence of the Tan family, and quickly disappearing from view. Initially, nothing was thought of this, and they continued on. Once they reached the gate to their home, they found it locked. The police surveyed the property and questioned the neighbors. The abandoned recycling station covers an area of nearly 450 square meters. Its construction area is only 90 square meters, and nearly 350 square meters are empty flower beds. The building was also illegal. The original owner randomly built several tin houses on the foundation as a waste recycling site, and the stone house on the other side was used as a pig farm, with almost no people living there. So the police only had one neighbor to question. An elderly woman named Huang, who lived alone across the street, said that she lived in the area for a long time. She knew their schedule and that in the afternoon they usually spent it tending to their garden. But aside from that, she didn't know too much about their personal lives. She said that due to the remote location, the family didn't have many relatives coming to visit. The only acquaintance of theirs that she knew of was Cheng Wei's middle-aged cousin, simply named Su. Huang didn't know much about Su, aside from overhearing Enyi mentioning that Cheng Wei's uncle lived in a nearby stone house. Cheng Wei's colleague told the police about his phone being answered by his cousin with the police, assuming that the man on the other end was Su. Huang didn't know Su's address or the address of this uncle, but she did hear cries of help from the house on July 5th. So the police mobilized several officers to conduct door-to-door inquiries in Pingche village. Investigators later that same day managed to track the man down at a stone house at No. 74 Wuzhou Road. The man was 42-year-old Su Shanqi, and he confirmed that he was Cheng Wei's cousin. He said that he usually visited the family home to help renovate and work on the garden, and when asked about the contents of the phone call, he stood by his story that the family went to China for vacation. He said that on July 5th, Cheng Wei visited his mother at the nursing home before returning to the home and telling him that he planned on going to Dongguan, China for a few days. The roaming fee for bringing his Hong Kong mobile phone into the mainland would have been too expensive, so he asked him to hold on to it until he got back. And the person police and Cheng Wei's colleague witnessed fleeing was actually Su leaving after feeding the family dogs. Shanqi's body language and expressions were observed, and he didn't seem the least bit troubled, and there were seemingly no glaring inconsistencies with his story. They asked Shanqi if he had a key to the family home, but he said he didn't. Even though they found Shanqi, the police continued their door-to-door inquiries. Some of the villagers told police that a few days earlier, a stranger had borrowed money from a female villager in the village. They later had a heated exchange where she threatened that when Cheng Wei's mother was hospitalized, he also was in debt for her, and that she would go to their home to collect it if the stranger didn't pay. According to the other villagers, however, the stranger was not Shanqi. But even so, there was now speculation that the family could have gone into hiding to escape their debts and lied to their cousin, or so they thought. When the police asked the villagers about Shanqi, that is when they learned that he lied. The villagers confirmed that Shanqi regularly went to the area to maintain and work on the home, and that he was always able to open the gate and door on his own, despite no one else being home. To the police, this meant that he must have had a key or access to the home. In fact, he did, because Huang witnessed Cheng Wei hand the key to Shanqi. He left the key at the university office and asked Shanqi to pick it up for him, and Huang witnessed this exchange. The police returned to Shanqi's home and asked for the key. He again denied owning one and said that he used a spare key for renovations, which he returned and thus didn't have access to, as Shanqi was far less collected compared to his last line of questioning. Shanqi was also deliberately avoiding key details, so when the police threatened to search his home, Shanqi became panicked and suddenly remembered that he had another house key that he didn't return. He retrieved the key from his dresser and gave it to the police. Despite his suspicious behavior, there was no direct evidence linking Shanqi to the disappearance of the family, so the police put him under surveillance while continuing the investigation while using the spare key to investigate the home. The inside of the home was a mess and clearly had been ransacked. Investigators also found several fresh bloodstains on the wall. Judging by the spread of the bloodstains, someone had likely been killed on the property. When police went to the kitchen, they found a sink full of dirty dishes, which poked more holes into the story that they went to China, as they would have left their house a mess before leaving. Inside the couple's master bedroom, the police discovered the family's ID cards in the dresser. The head investigator contacted the border crossing office, and according to them, the family never left Hong Kong. They continued to search the house and found a blood-stained shirt in a side room, and a blood-stained plastic hollow water pipe in the corner. The police used sniffer dogs to try and find more evidence, or maybe even the family themselves. The dogs picked up a scent, and 9 meters away found bloodstains under freshly turned over soil. And lastly, even though it was summer vacation, the couple's daughters, Shawan and Xiaowan, had signed up for summer school, meaning they wouldn't be on vacation. It became obvious that the family had become victims of foul play, and soon, a dedicated task force was established to investigate the case. As it turned out though, no investigation actually needed to take place. The police, due to the late hour, simply cordoned off the scene and blocked the entrance and exit of Ping Che village to outsiders, while placing Shenki under house arrest as the main suspect. Shenki quickly confessed. According to Shenki, he was from Wangpu in Guangdong province and usually lived with his sister, wife, and a 15-year-old and 16-year-old son, whether they are his children, nieces, nephews, etc., etc., doesn't appear to be explained, who suffered from memory problems. He used to make a living from motorcycles in Zhongshan City, but in 2006, Guangdong's ban on motorcycles for obvious reasons led to a drop in sales and income. Due to his financial troubles, he contacted his cousin Tan Chenghui in Hong Kong and asked if he could help find him some work in the city. Chenghui managed to get Shenki working at a construction job that paid a daily salary of 500 Hong Kong dollars including board and lodging. After half a month of work, Shenki wasn't satisfied with his salary, and due to company deductions, he was only getting 220 Hong Kong dollars. He quit his job without notice and returned to China in a fit of anger. In 2007, he moved back to Hong Kong due to the extensive damage that Typhoon Pabuk dealt to his home. The repairs would cost a lot of money, so he asked Chenghui to hook him up with employment in Hong Kong again. Chenghui was unable to find anywhere hiring, so he offered to pay Chenghui out of his own salary if he agreed to help work on his own home. Shenki accepted this offer. So under this arrangement, every other month, Shenki would travel to Hong Kong to do work and odd jobs for the household, often tending to their garden and doing repairs to their home. Then, according to Shenki, he and Enyi began to have an affair behind Chenghui's back, which was discovered by Chenghui. On July 3rd, Shenki went to Hong Kong, and on July 5th, took Chenghui to the nursing home to visit his mother. Shenki then snuck out of the nursing home to return home and continue his affair with Enyi, only for Chenghui to unexpectedly return home early. A furious Chenghui charged toward him and tackled him with Shenki, saying he had murderous intent in his eyes. In desperation, he grabbed a 25 centimeters long fruit knife and stabbed Chenghui until he fell into a pool of blood dead. Enyi was understandably terrified by what just happened and wanted to go to the police. Shenki said that he couldn't let that happen, and since he couldn't dissuade Enyi, he decided to kill her too. He found some wires in the corner of the room and charged toward her, knocking her to the ground and tying her hands behind her back. She then covered her mouth and nose with tape and covered her head with a plastic bag. Before this happened, the couple's 2 children were in a bedroom watching cartoons. She screamed at them to run away, but instead ran towards their mother and saw their father dead and Shenki in the process of killing their mother. They too ran into their room crying and locked the door. Since she was already tied up, Shenki abandoned Enyi to head after them. The wails of Shaowan and Zhao Ying are what Huang heard. Picking up a pair of pliers, Shenki pried open the door, and using some more wires, he did what he did to Enyi. He tied their hands behind their backs, taped over their mouth and nose, and put a plastic bag over their heads. Shenki left their bedroom and returned to where he was prior to find that Enyi finally stopped breathing. Shaowan and Zhao Ying both suffocated not long after. After killing the whole family, Shenki was at a loss of what to do next. He turned to his home to think it over. He thought that hiding them in a ditch or body of water would be too easy to find, and that dismembering them would be too exhausting and time-consuming. So he settled on burying them on their own property. On July 6th, he returned to the home to try and clean up as many bloodstains as he could find. He then got to work on digging the hole. He dug a hole deep and wide enough to hold the family of 4, and quickly placed their bodies inside of it. He also disposed of the murder weapons in the pit before the hole back in. The police, while skeptical about his motive, did believe the rest of the story, and brought Schenke to the home, where he pointed to the area that held the sharp knife, a water pipe, a pair of iron pliers, and the other tools used for committing the crime. The police, on July 7th, called the fire department to help with unearthing the remains. The firefighters arrived with excavation tools and were also wearing gas masks, as the bodies were buried near a septic tank. They began digging, only to very quickly encounter a problem. They hit cement. Schenke left one detail out in his confession, and that was how he filled the pit with cement before filling it back in. The firefighters were unable to estimate the thickness of the cement, and as it had dried, the tools they brought with them would be incapable of breaking through. The police had to call in a private engineering company, who arrived with their high-grade tools and began drilling through the concrete slab. The engineering team seemed to have weak stomachs, as when they drilled through and saw human hair, they suddenly lost their nerve and refused to keep digging, as they didn't want to see a dead body. It took the police a total of 13 hours to finally talk them into continuing. After fully digging through, the pit was found to be 2.4 meters wide and 6 feet deep. The 4 bodies of the family were found at the bottom, all barefoot and only wearing t-shirts and shorts. At the very bottom was Cheng Wei's body. Both of his hands and feet were tied up with electric wire, and he had suffered multiple stab wounds to his abdomen, back, and neck, with his clothes stained red with blood. And his hands and feet were also tied up with electric wires, and a wire was wrapped around her neck. Her mouth and nose were sealed with a yellow transparent tape. Shuawen's mouth and nose were covered with tape, her hands and feet were bound, and her face was distorted. And lastly, Shuawen's face was distorted, her hands and feet were bound, her mouth and nose were sealed, and her eyes were covered with transparent tape. Nye Shuawen and Shuawen had no obvious signs of trauma, which led police to believe they may have been buried alive. Schenke was formally arrested, and when interrogated he changed his confession. He said that he lied about the affair, but he did try and start one and come on to Nye. Nye was uncomfortable and told Cheng Wei about this. Cheng Wei was enraged and kicked him out of the home and banned him from stepping foot in it again. Afterwards, Schenke returned to the home anyway to apologize, and surprisingly Cheng Wei forgave him. On July 3rd, he returned to the home to start working, and the cousins' relationship seemed to be repaired. Until July 4th, when Schenke again tried to come on to Nye, when Cheng Wei was away. Schenke decided to escalate and attempted to molest and fumble with Nye, who ran away and called for help, locking herself in a room. Schenke, not wanting the neighbors alerted, fled the home in a rage. On July 5th, Schenke waited for Cheng Wei to visit his mother at the nursing home to try and force his way into the family home again, claiming that he wanted to issue a second apology. Cheng Wei was worried that this would happen though, and returned home early to see Schenke on the property and trying to get inside to speak to Nye again. The two got into an argument where, in the heat of the moment, he stabbed Cheng Wei, of his own volition and not self-defense. The rest of the confession matched the details of his initial one, but with the added detail of filling the makeshift grave with cement. However, after the bodies were taken away for autopsy, it was found that Schenke was still lying. Cheng Wei's murder was far more brutal than Schenke had described. Cheng Wei had suffered from 9 stab wounds on his head and neck, nearly 80 on his body, and 10 stab wounds on his hands and feet. Rather than being suffocated with a plastic bag, Nye had been strangled, with the same being true for Zhao Ying as well, only Xiaoan's cause of death was as Schenke described. Forensic investigations of the home revealed the cutlery and dishes did not have the family's DNA on them, but they did have Shenki's, and that Cheng Wei was not killed in the kitchen. He was likely killed elsewhere, and Enyi didn't know until Shenki attacked her next. The weapon Shenki used was not a kitchen knife from the family, and instead one of his own in the cement. He used to bury the corpses he purchased before the murder, which spoke to premeditation. Through investigations, the police also found that Enya's bank cards had been used at ATMs after the time of death, but no money could be withdrawn due to repeated failed PIN number guesses. And lastly, their cash and bank cards were missing, which meant that the motive was robbery, and the crime was premeditated. Like usually whenever the police pointed out a discrepancy in his story, he suddenly gave a new one. According to Shenki, his ancestral home in China needed repairs, while his 2 children were in school and urgently needed 100,000 in cash to make the payment. He was not well liked in his local area, so if he asked to borrow money, he'd be denied, and whenever he went to Hong Kong, he didn't make much money, so he turned to Cheng Wei for help. Shenki had an idea in his head that Cheng Wei was a miser who was far richer than he appeared, and that the reason he had a low salary when he worked for Cheng Wei was because they were using him for cheap labor. On July 3rd, Shenki returned to Hong Kong on his own without telling anyone and waited until July 5th when the couple didn't have to go to work. Having a concealed knife on him, he knocked on the door while Cheng Wei was at the nursing home and talked to Enyi. Once Cheng Wei returned and saw Shenki with there, he asked Enyi to cook something while the two talked. Once Enyi left to go to the kitchen, Shenki almost immediately asked to borrow 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. Cheng Wei rejected the request because while he did have the money, and even more, he had to spend it on his mother's treatment and his daughter's education. Shenki refused to believe him and accused him of only using him for free and cheap labor. Cheng Wei was angered by the accusation, and when Shenki persisted, he ordered him to leave. Once Cheng Wei turned his back, Shenki charged towards him and covered his mouth before stabbing him from behind. He then restrained a terrified Anye Shawan and Zhao Ying, searched around the home for cash and the backwards, and then demanded to know the password. Anye purposefully gave a fake password, but at the time, Shenki didn't know this. Shenki continued to lie about strangling anyone and insisted that he killed the others by putting tape over their mouths and noses, as well as a plastic bag over their head. When Shenki left for the nearest ATM, he realized he had been lied to when the PIN number wouldn't work. He returned home to find that in his absence, they had all suffocated to death. Shenki noticed the food that Enyi had been preparing and decided to eat it next to the 4 corpses, while he thought of how to dispose of the bodies. After stealing 6,000 Hong Kong dollars from Cheng Wei's person, he buried the corpses and tools involved in a small pit before going to sleep at his temporary home. The next morning, he woke up and realized that the bodies may be discovered due to the smell escaping from the soil. So he left to buy cement at a store and returned to the home to dig up the pit he had made and poured in the cement before refilling the hole. He would then stay at the home for a little while to answer any calls to Cheng Wei's cell phone or house phone and tell his story about how he was tasked with looking after things while they went on vacation. Shenki said he wasn't expecting the charade to be uncovered so quickly. Even now, Shenki was still lying about many details such as how he purchased the cement before the murder and the cause of Enye and Zhao Ying's death. But the police at this point had stopped caring about getting a truthful confession, as they felt like they had more than enough evidence to proceed. The trial was held at the Hong Kong High Court on October 28, 2010, and he pled not guilty, and instead said that his initial story about having an affair with Enye was actually correct, with Cheng Wei being killed in self-defense and Enye Shawan and Zhao Yin being killed accidentally. According to him, he only confessed to extorting the family and killing them for financial motives because he was beaten and tortured by the police with them, strangling him and suffocating him with plastic bags until he gave the confession that they wanted. On November 23, the jury returned their verdict and unanimously found him guilty of the murder of Cheng Wei, Enye, and Zhaoying. On the charge of murdering Shaoan, however, he was acquitted and instead found guilty of manslaughter, with the jury split 5-2. This ultimately made no difference though, as for 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter, Su Shenki received a life sentence. The presiding judge said that Shenki was utterly devoid of a conscience, worse than a beast, and completely unrepentant, and accused Shenki of fabricating the self-defense story and the affair with Enyi, not to get a lower sentence, but just to smear their good name post-mortem. Interestingly, Shenki's family living in Hong Kong actually came to his defense, accusing Cheng Hui of being a hypocrite and the true villain who was draining Shenki of his money, pocketing money for his work and from Shenki's salary, and simply using Shenki for cheap labor. The neighbors and residents of Pingche village were outraged by these claims, and Shenki's family moved back to China to avoid the backlash. The crime was one of the most shocking in Hong Kong's history, and an outpouring of support came to the family, with many visiting the home to give condolences and netizens raising more than enough money to hold a funeral for the family. The family's 9 stray dogs were also adopted and taken in by another family, who every July 5th would take them for a walk in Pingche village near the home of their former owners. On August 9, 2022, at the age of 55, Su Shenki passed away in Hong Kong's Stanley Prison of liver cancer. Patrick Merrill was a 21-year-old freshman Plymouth State College student from New York who went missing on April 6, 1978, last seen on Route 3, near downtown Plymouth. He is still listed as a missing person. At the time of his disappearance, he was living in the Bradford Manor student rooming house. Patrick's family described him as having a heavy beard, light mustache, bright blue eyes, a scar on his nose, a false front tooth, reddish auburn hair, 5'9". An additional article I found stated 5'11", and 130 to 140 pounds. Valley News, April 23, 1987. In 2023, he would be 57. I have searched the web and old newspaper articles related to his case, and it is infuriating to say the least. Merrill was last seen at 7:30 p.m. on April 6, 1987, getting into George Pregan's 40 at the time, green Mercury Comet with VT plates. Pregand was a resident of Keene. Anne Merrill met Pregand in February 1987 while hitchhiking from the University of MA to Plymouth, NH. He collected newspapers, say anywhere from $6,000, $13,000, from his friends to buy 10 pounds of marijuana from Pregand, and was never seen again after entering Pregand's car. According to Merrill's sister, he was a casual marijuana user and was not involved with dealing before this incident. Also, according to his sister, Merrill was conducting the deal for friends at UMass, and possibly PSC students, and expected to profit $2,000. Merrill's mother felt that he would not voluntarily go missing, as his father was terminally ill with cancer. The Burlington Free Press, July 7, 1987. On April 13, 1987, Pregant, along with David Lunglua 20, VT, were arrested in Romney, NH, driving the same Mercury Comet that Merrill was last seen in, which was impounded upon Pregant's arrest, and arrested on possession of controlled substance with intent to sell. Pregant was taken into custody at Grafton County Jail and refused to speak about Merrill. Valley News, April 23, 1987. According to the Concord Monitor, May 27, 1987, Pregant was living in the 1875 house, 618 Fairground RD, Plymouth, NH. At the time contradicts the other articles stating he is a Keene, NH or Proctor, VT resident, and was arrested on theft of services. Between April 4 to 6 he used a false name and address to avoid paying for car repairs. Pregant's record dates back to the 1960s and is described by police as a career criminal. The Boston Globe, May 1990. On July 10, 1987, while awaiting trial for theft of service charges in Merrimack County Jail, Pregent escaped through a skylight after cutting the bars with a smuggled hacksaw blade Concord monitor. July 11, 1987. I was not able to locate information about Pregent's capture or return to prison. Previously, in 1976, Pregent escaped from a Burlington VT prison while serving time for the theft of 32 Volkswagens. He was caught in Boston, MA, in September 1978. Pregent was paroled in 1981 and then became a teacher at Lamoille Union High School until he was arrested in December 1984 for planning a break-in and theft at Copley Hospital Pharmacy. He was imprisoned for this and again paroled in December 1986. The Burlington Free Press, July 7, 1987. In 1990, Pregent was jailed in North Carolina on forgery convictions. The Boston Globe, May 1990. A week after Merrill's disappearance, a Jeep, owned by Pregent, was believed to be seen in Proctor VT, close to a bog. This bog, Proctor Bog, is near West Mountain, about 1.5 miles up a trail on Kane Street, off an old logging road. This trail is also referred to as High Ledge by area locals. Rutland Daily Herald, May 1990. Pregent, no date provided. Formerly lived in Proctor. In 1987, a gallon plastic jar containing decomposed hand palms and foot soles was found in another wooded area in Proctor that Pregent was known to frequent. Merrill has a relatively rare blood type AB. The skin from the jug was tested and matches Merrill's blood type. Rutland Daily Herald, May 1990. An article by the Boston Globe states that a DNA analysis was conducted on the skin to determine if they were Merrill's, but they would not discuss the test results. The Boston Globe, May 1990. NH and VT State Police searched the bog in Proctor on May 9, 1990, using police dogs trained to sniff out bodies. The police dogs indicated that on the west side of the bog they may have smelled body parts. Rutland Daily Herald, May 1990. Another article states the police dogs alerted to a specific spot of the bog 3 individual times, but nothing was found in the area. Valley New, May 24, 1990. A direct quote from the Rutland Daily Herald article: police have believed for several years that Merrill's dismembered body could be in the pond. Their plans to execute a search have repeatedly fallen through. After waiting for 2 years for the bog to drain naturally in the fall, police finally opted to obtain permission to drain the pond. Rutland Daily Herald, May 1990. During the search, east of the bog near a stone wall, 5 bones ranging from 4 to 7 were found. The bones were tested by pathologists and an anthropologist at the University of VT, and were later found to be animal bone. Police stated that George Pregent was the only suspect in the case, but without a body they felt that prosecutors would have difficulty convicting Pregent of Merrill's murder. The Boston Globe, May 1990. A confidential informant gave information to VT and NH police that suggests that Pregent never intended to sell Merrill the marijuana. The informant conveyed that Pregent stole the money, murdered, and dismembered Merrill, burying the bones in Proctor Bog. This article states that Pregent was living in Proctor at the time of Merrill's disappearance, contradicting the other articles that list Plymouth and Keene. Police say they recovered some of the money from the drug deal, and that the money is connected to Pregent. The informant, an associate of Pregent, told police that Pregent showed him the plastic bottles with palms and foot soles 2 days after Merrill's disappearance. This informant also told VT State Police that he saw Pregent with a plastic bag containing limbs, and that Pregent went to Proctor Bog the day after the informant saw the bag. Tire tracks and other evidence doesn't specify. Suggest Pregent drove to the bog and walked along the marsh. Valley New, May 24, 1990. VT State Police Detective SGT Brian Abbey said that police will not search the bog again for the body, but he predicts Pregent will be charged with murder. He is quoted as saying, "We have a very, very strong case. The only record I could locate relating to anyone in this case, after May 1990, is an article about Pregent's arrest in Concord, NH, in January 2002, on felony-level counts of possession with intent to distribute, and being a felon in possession of a firearm. Concord Monitor, 2002. as described by his sister. Merrill was the youngest of three, enjoyed basketball, scuba diving, and the outdoors. He read everything and loved to play chess. He was a wonderful kid with a sense of adventure and a wonderful sense of humor. The Boston Globe, May 1990. From what I could find, George Pregent is still alive today and was never charged. Presuming that he is guilty, he needs to be charged so Patrick Merrill can finally have justice. Patrick's family deserves to have peace, closure, and to know what happened to him all those years ago. I think it goes without saying, but nobody deserves to be murdered over pot. I'm not sure what, but I'm sure something can be done with all the advancements in DNA and science that the criminal justice system has today, in comparison to the late 1980s and early 1990s. All I know is Patrick Merrill deserves to be found and put to rest. I found an obituary of his mom, who passed away last year. I cannot imagine the heartache and turmoil she went through all those years, not knowing what happened to her son, or where he was. Gloria Moody is the first known victim of the Highway of Tears, a name given to British Columbia's Highway 16 and surrounding highways, due to many deaths and missing persons cases that have occurred there over the years. She was an indigenous woman from the Bella Coola Reserve, in British Columbia. A mother of two, Gloria was 27 years old when she went on a family trip to Williams Lake, a scenic area about 450 kilometers from her home. At the time, a 12-hour drive. Her parents urged her to go on the trip to spend some time away from her unfaithful and abusive common-law husband. Her brother Dave and their parents were traveling with her, while her kids stayed at their aunt's house. On October 23, 1969, the family left the reserve and spent the night at Anaheim Lake, before continuing to Williams Lake the next day. They arrived on the afternoon of the 24th and checked into the Ranch Hotel, a hotel and bar, at their destination. The next day, Gloria and Dave decided to do some bar hopping, visiting a few local bars, including the Lakeview and the Maple Leaf, before returning to the Ranch Hotel. They were seen at the Ranch Hotel's bar around 10 p.m., after which time Dave left to go back to their room. While walking, Dave turned around to say something to Gloria, but she wasn't there. Though he thought she was right behind him the entire time, she in fact wasn't. No one at the bar recalled seeing her leave either. The next morning, two people, a mechanic and his friend, drove out to a small lake just a few miles from Williams Lake. On the way back, they noticed Gloria's body on a small cattle trail and immediately called the police. The description of the scene is horrific. When police found her, Gloria's body was naked and beaten, her clothes tossed nearby, and she showed signs of a brutal sexual assault. The coroner determined that she bled to death, which may have taken as much as half an hour after the assault was done. Police conducted an investigation, but no one in town had seen Gloria leave the bar, so there weren't any leads. To make things worse, the town was especially busy that weekend, as it was a paid weekend off for many workers, and a local 4-H sale helped fill hotels to capacity. In short, there were too many potential perpetrators, and no way to narrow them down. Gloria's family was shaken by the murder. Her father blamed himself for her death. Gloria's daughter, Vanessa, said that he locked himself in my mom's room, and he just lay there. He didn't eat or sleep, and when he came out, everybody in the whole town talked about how his hair went pure white. After Gloria's death, her mother and father adopted and raised her two children. Though police made an investigation into the murder, it took almost 3 decades for Gloria's family to find out anything about it. When they did, Vanessa says, police gave them 3 suspect names who might have killed the young mother, including a bartender from Williams Lake. Unfortunately, no one was ever charged for the crimes, and all 3 suspects had passed away before the family was notified of their potential involvement, meaning no one knows whether they really committed the crimes. Vanessa said that some Williams Lake residents told her everyone knows who did it, but won't say for some odd reason, perhaps fear. To this day, Gloria's murder remains unsolved.